At Man City Fan TV, we're really pleased to promote this wonderful sketchwork artwork by a lady called Leslie Ross. You can follow Leslie on Twitter at 111Leslie111 and also follow her on Facebook and Twitter at 9320art. Hi guys, it's Andy from Man City Fan TV, and I'm really pleased today that we've managed to get two sort of legends of different sort of areas on our channel, and one of them is Colin Savage, otherwise known as at Presswich Blue. Colin does a lot, big Man City fan, and does a lot on FFP and financial stuff. So Colin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And obviously we've got Jonathan Northcroft there, somebody who I had the pleasure back in December of interviewing outside the Etihad, sorry, after the, I think it was it a Bournemouth game? Bournemouth game, and we talked about some of the issues that were arising with FFP and the Matthew Hedges stuff. So I want to say a massive thank you to Jonathan. Today is all about FFP and the Der Spiegel articles that have again reared its head. Coincidentally, as soon as we go top of the league, these articles start coming out again. But what I did was I asked both of them, Colin and Jonathan, to send me some questions, and both of those are going to debate these questions to each other. I'm just solely here to facilitate them. But before we do, there has just been some news that's broken in the last sort of hour, and that is about Footy Leaks whistleblower Rui Pinto, who it's stated that an Hungarian court has approved the extradition on Tuesday of the hacker linked to the Football Leaks website. That has exposed alleged corruption, sparking investigations into several European countries, clubs, etc. He was detained on a European arrest warrant issued in his native Portugal back a few weeks ago, January the 16th, where he lives, but the extradition request cannot be refused, and EU member states are expected to have a similar judicial standards. So he's going to be deported back to Portugal on these alleged leaks, etc. So my first question, like I said, both these guys sent in questions to Man City Fan TV. I'm going to start with one of Jonathan's questions to Colin, and that is, how can Football Leaks and Der Spiegel's work be dismissed as a smear campaign? So Colin, over to you.
Right, okay, thanks for that. I'm going to give you a bit of a longish explanation because a lot of what we're going to talk about is very dependent on understanding the context. Now, obviously, City failed financial fair play in 2013-14 after the first assessment period. A lot of the Der Spiegel documents and the timeline relates to that period. So it relates specifically to the 2012-13 period. Now, you've got to understand, and it's not generally well understood, what was happening there. And I've written about this recently, and what I wrote was independently verified. But I was fairly confident about it anyway. Now, obviously, City were incurring huge losses around that time. So financial fair play was first talked about 2009. It was established during that 2009-10 season. 2010, it was announced it would be coming into play for the 2011-12 season. The first assessment was based on 2011-12, 2012-13 accounts. Now, obviously, one of the things that clubs were nervous about was they signed contracts with players for 5 years. So they were nervous that contracts they were committed to before FFP had even been talked about could impact on their ability to pass FFP. So UEFA introduced something within Annex 11 of the FFP rules, which deals with factors to be considered when looking at compliance. And this specifically relates, I'm sure Jonathan's aware of this, is that if clubs failed FFP because of wages paid in the 2012 financial year, under contract signed prior to June 2010, before the FFP rules were introduced, then in theory, in principle, they could claim mitigation and escape sanctions. Okay, so having established that, City were never going to pass FFP. 2011-12, their losses were just under 100 million. It was slightly less the following year, 50 million. But they were never going to come close to passing. But what they were relying on, what they were clearly relying on, and some of the emails that were leaked demonstrate this quite clearly, was to use this provision within Annex 11 of the 2012 wages. Now, beside the actual regulations which are on the UEFA website, UEFA sent out what they call a toolkit with these for the first assessment. So the toolkit was a spreadsheet template and a whole list of guidance and rules about filling it in. So this was the official, basically, submission to, well, it's not to UEFA. I think actually the FA or the Premier League are our licensor. But there are very detailed instructions on how to fill this in, what could go in, what they could exclude, and among those met this provision, Section 2 within Annex 11 of these applicable wages. Now, I knew some of the numbers, and I'd already worked out when the 2012 accounts went out, I could work out from that if City recorded a loss of below 55 million in the 2013 financial year, they would, in theory, be able to use this provision. And under the first toolkit that UEFA sent out, the calculations supported that. So if there were three tests, I won't go into it in any great detail. There were three tests that had to be met, and one was totally dependent on those 2012 accounts. So basically, City had to show that the 2012 loss, which of course is adjusted for certain things you can add back, that the 2012 loss was solely attributable to the wages paid under this Annex 11 Section 2 provision, which was 80 million in City's case. And it did. So City at that point, by if they'd reported a loss of under 55 million in the year to 2013, they should, in theory, have avoided any sanction. They still would have failed. And originally I was a bit inexact about this, but they still would have failed FFP, but UEFA should have said, well, okay, you failed because of these wages, we won't apply any sanction. Now, after City had produced their 2012 accounts, and I believe they had to submit them to UEFA, UEFA made some changes to the FFP regulations. So part of it was about actually ensuring that any state-related sponsorship was limited to like 30% of total revenue. But there was a very small change in this Annex 11 Section 2 calculation, and it affected the 2012 accounts. And basically, City, having been able to, in theory, claim mitigation, were now unable to do so. But at the time, this came out almost at the end of the 2013 financial year. So City's main concern in that year, and I'm not using it as a blanket defence, I'm just pointing out what I believe to be the facts, are that they were concerned with getting as much revenue in as they could to reduce all the conditions for Annex 11. So obviously, because of the change, everything then went out the window because they couldn't then change the 2012 accounts. They were committed, they've been submitted, they've been filed at Companies House. So basically they were stuck. So not only had they failed financial fair play, which they're going to do anyway, they'd fallen outside the criteria to claim the 2012 wages paid under contract prior to 2010 as mitigation. So that left them open to sanction. And when you say, when you talk about dismissing this as a smear campaign, it's going over old ground because it's referring to the time that we were struggling. Whether I'm sure we'll have the debate about whether we were right, wrong, immoral, unethical, smart, clever, whatever you want to call it. City's main concern in that 2012-13 financial year was, under the rules as they understood them at the time to meet this target. So I say we didn't. UEFA changed the rules, and whether that was a good move in hindsight or a bad move, whether they did it wittingly or unwittingly, because the wording actually in the financial fair play is very ambiguous. So you could interpret it either the ways UEFA interpret it. You could justify it. So why I think people talk about it as a smear campaign is for quite simple reason. It's going back over old ground. So and UEFA were well aware of some of the things. It's quite clear, having read the Spiegel articles in detail, UEFA had looked at the Etihad sponsorship. UEFA had looked and had cast some question marks over the other what they call the tier 2 sponsorships. So Etisalat, Arbar, I think at the time with the two. There was some argument about whether they were related parties, and that's a completely different issue. So basically, this is just going over old ground, and that's why I think perhaps to call it a smear campaign, whatever you want to call it, that's why I think City fans are reacting to this. Well, certainly, it's my view that it's going over old ground. We failed financial fair play. We thought we might get away with it. We didn't, because the UEFA changed the rules slightly. Whether that's relevant or not, it's neither here nor there. We did fail. We were sanctioned, and I think we all know the story behind the sanctions. And I think again, that's something we'll talk about later.
Okay, so that's Colin's answer to your question, which leads me to you can answer as well, Jonathan. But Colin's first question to you was: do you actually understand the significance of the 2012-2013 financial year in the overall scheme of things? So on the back of Colin's answer to you and Colin's first question to you, Jonathan, what are your thoughts on what Colin's just said?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, and to answer Colin's question, I think he knows the figures and the intricacies better than me, so I'm not going to pretend that I have such an intimate knowledge. But my understanding is slightly different. I think it's correct to say that this is an old financial period. I'm not sure if it's old ground, because yes, these relate to the period before 2012, but my understanding is that the financial fair play penalties levied against City in that period were simply for the £150 million losses for not staying within the budget. It wasn't about sources of funding, and the documents that have been the alleged documents that have been revealed in the football leaks are about sources of funding, and they are specifically alleging that City misled UEFA over where this money was coming from. It's not about what City were actually penalised for, which was an overall loss. It is the sources of funding, and the allegations are that this money was effectively coming from the royal family of Abu Dhabi, from the ADUG Adu Group, which of course control Manchester City, and that they were topping up sponsored deals such as the Abar deal. There's a leaked email that purports to be from Simon Pearce that says that His Highness will pay £12 million of the £18 million sponsorship. So
can I just jump in on that point? Is that the same article that Rob Draper of the Sunday Mail posted 2 days ago?
Yeah, I think what Rob's done is he has read the Spiegel, and you can see it in the Spiegel online. They've got 9 leaked documents. Yeah, so I think that's where Rob's drawn it from.
But Rob Draper in his article, and this is just like I said, this is your chat, but I'm gonna come in on occasions because that's where it all started from, and I posted on Twitter back to Rob Draper, never had a reply back from him, was the fact that he used the words of a sentence that was in Der Spiegel and the Simon Pearce sort of emails, and he left it at His Highness. And that's where he cut off the actual, this is what was said in the email. Now, if you read the actual article in Der Spiegel, he then turned around and said, Simon Pearce and the others involved in the email, he said, His Highness's alternative sources. So he was claiming that there were other alternative sources that they would, rectify the whatever, regardless. And whether that we believe that's right or wrong is the fact of Rob Draper actually just stopped his quote in the Daily Mail article at His Highness, which makes it then, for any independent reader of the article, sound like, well, that's basically saying it's coming from Sheikh Mansour and the royal family. He didn't add the further 2 or 3 words that were from alternative sources.
Okay. And I do get that, Andy.
That's naughty. I mean, that is naughty.
That's what journalists do.
Just to pill you up specifically on that, then. I mean, I'm not here to defend Rob Draper.
No.
But is there a big difference between saying His Highness and His Highness's alternative sources?
Yes. Can I come into this?
Yeah, of course.
There was a fundamental difference. And your colleague Matthew Syed made a big mistake in his article on Monday. Simon Pearce he's obviously worked in Abu Dhabi for a long, long time. I know someone who worked with Simon Pearce in Abu Dhabi. I don't know Simon at all. Never met him, never spoke to him, never had any contact with him at all. But what this friend told me was that he himself basically got a bollocking for putting in an email, His Highness, when it didn't refer to Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. His Highness is unequivocally Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Emir, the Crown Prince, whatever you want to call him, MBZ, if we're all mates. Matthew Syed said His Highness Sheikh Mansour. Now,
he didn't say Sheikh Mansour. He said His Highness.
No, Matthew Syed specifically
sorry.
Implied from that it was Sheikh Mansour. Now, obviously, Sheikh Mansour is the legal and titular owner of Manchester City through Adder. But what people, again, don't realise is this information has actually been in the public domain for quite a while, because Etihad were involved in a big, what you might call an antitrust case in the US about state subsidy of the airline. It was Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways, I believe. Yeah. And the US Justice Department made a case against them under the international provisions about state subsidy. So there's a firm of consultants came in and did a presentation on Etihad's finances, basically to counter the proposal. And it talks specifically about the city sponsorship. And it said in that report, and it's publicly available if you know where to look, that the bulk of the Etihad sponsorship is provided by the Executive Council. So that supports, the interpretation of His Highness as being Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed.
Okay, that's fine.
That opens a whole set of other questions. Of course.
I get that, but that isn't actually, that's not the central point I'm raising here. The central point I'm raising here wasn't actually about Etihad. It was about what is new about these allegations. And these allegations, there are 9 pages in Der Spiegel. You can all read them. And the allegations are that Manchester City concealed the sources of funding from UEFA, if proven true. And this is why, although it's an old financial period, as Colin says, that has already been dealt with in some ways, this is new information, and it is up to UEFA to decide whether they're going to do anything about this or not. And we'll get on to that. We don't know if they are going to, but there is a quote from Yves Leterme that suggests that if true, City might face penalty. But the reason, if I can just mention, the reason I asked Colin the question initially about how can Der Spiegel be dismissed as a smear campaign, what I meant was Manchester City fans seem to think that Football Leaks and Der Spiegel are out to get them. Now let's look at the context of what Football Leaks is and who Der Spiegel are. Football Leaks started in 2015. You mentioned Rui Pinto, the Portuguese hacker. Actually, the first thing that Football Leaks did, which was a website, was to uncover sort of contract illegalities in Portuguese football. Yeah. The next thing that happened was they went after FC Twente Enschede in Holland. Yeah. Der Spiegel started working with them in 2016. The first Der Spiegel stories were about Cristiano Ronaldo and Mesut Ozil. The next ones were about Bundesliga footballers. They then published details about Balkan warlords involved in football, about South American agents dealing with Juventus and Manchester United. They've written a book, a 400-page book about football leagues. Manchester United are mentioned in it far more than Manchester City. So what I want Manchester City fans to understand is that football leagues are a large project that does not have a specific focus on Manchester City. Der Spiegel are in possession of 18.6 million documents, of which these Manchester City documents are merely some. But the overall purpose of football leagues, and we don't know who's behind this, we know about this one hacker, but I doubt he's acting alone. But the general purpose seems to be to go after anyone in football where they can uncover allegations of financial wrongdoing, of greed, of corruption, or so on. And I'm not saying Manchester City, from a legal point of view, are guilty of any of these things, but this is the overriding project behind football leagues. And Der Spiegel are basically the German equivalent of, I don't know, The Economist or Newsweek. They're not a rag, they're not Bild, they're an investigative, serious magazine. So whatever you think about the specific things that they've published, I am baffled as to why Manchester City fans think that this is specifically an attempt to get their club. This is just something that's part of a much larger whole.
Can I just step in here, guys? Obviously, because that's a good question, and Colin, you can come back with that. But Colin's you've had a question to Colin.
Okay.
Colin, I want to give a question back to you.
Can I just
come back to it. I'm going to have to be really assertive here because we'll be here all day. Is there a Colin's question to you, Jonathan? Is there a clear line between being smart and being immoral or unethical?
It's a good question. I think unethical is ethics are very much depend on culture, on individuals, and so on.
Your opinion on that question?
In my opinion, no. I think it's a very grey area. I think there's a clear line where the law begins and ends, and I think it's much easier to talk about what the rules and regulations are and whether people have breached them or not. I think when you start to talk about ethics, you start to talk about beliefs, and I think if we're relating this to financial fair play, I can understand, and I'm not here to defend FFP. I think you both know that I'm not a fan of it.
I think hopefully we'll talk about that later. But
yeah, and you know, I can completely see where there might be an ethical question about FFP because it does rather seem to suit the ruling elite, and that's not ethically right. But is it ethical? I guess the crux of this question, Colin, if I understand it right, is it ethical to try and get round a rule or a law that you don't agree with? I think it's quite difficult to answer. But what I would say is that if everybody does it in a society or in a sport, then we're left in a very, very difficult place. And because everyone's got different ethics and different sets of beliefs, you're looking at chaos or anarchy if everyone's allowed to act just according to what their own beliefs or ethics are on a particular subject.
Colin.
I think I take that on board. And but you know, if everything was black and white, we wouldn't have tax lawyers and accountants and judges and things like that. I mean, just this morning or yesterday, wasn't there? There was a story about Tony Benn's family donating his papers to the British Library and thereby happening to save £200,000 in inheritance tax. And Tony Benn as a socialist, would he have approved of that? I don't know. But to come back, and I think I take your point, and to talk about, just to come back what you said before, because it does tie into this, the source of funding, and that's an important point, and I take that on board. There is a clear line here, I think, because in view of what we talked about, financial fair play inhibits owner investment in clubs. We can talk about whether that's right or wrong, and certainly the rules were changed slightly to permit owner investment in clubs. So even I think UEFA saw that as a weak legal point. Anyway, so So if Sheikh Mansour, as the owner, legal owner of Manchester City, has been investing money through the Etihad sponsorships or the other sponsorships, then probably that will be perceived as clearly breaking the rules. And I have said this to people. There is a big difference between ADUG putting in the money directly, and if City have done that, then they've been completely stupid. Well, they're not doing it directly, but obviously, if 50 million comes in from Etihad, in one sense, that it doesn't matter where that 50 million comes from. But if it crossed the line from 10 million coming from Etihad and 40 million coming from Sheikh Mansour, I would agree that's a clear breach of the rules, because that's disguised owner investment. And I have made this point to other people. The question is, could UEFA ever determine that 100%? And this is where perhaps the being clever, for want of a better word, comes in, because, as we said, Sheikh Mansour is the legal owner of Manchester City. I think most thinking people understand that it's not a plaything. There's been a serious investment by the state of Abu Dhabi. But Sheikh Mansour is sort of at arm's length to that. The fact I've written articles about this. I've said it in King of the Kipak, so the club have seen it from the club. Get that they see it from themselves. The involvement of people like Simon Pearce and Khaldun and Mubarak. They're not there to do Sheikh Mansour their mates a favour. They're serious players in Abu Dhabi, and that to me is one of the clues that this is a bigger strategic project for Abu Dhabi. Now, people throw back at me, well, if it is, how did Sulaiman Al Fahim ever get involved in this? And it's a very good point. So whether it was a very clever bind or whether the guys in Abu Dhabi quickly saw the potential, and I've heard whispers back that they were staggered at the amount of attention it got them. This purchase of a football club in Manchester was brought them far more attention. It was someone told me, when they meet foreign dignitaries, it's the first thing the foreign dignitary brings up. Oh, I see Manchester City lost or won on Saturday. So however it worked out, I think most thinking people agree it's not a Sheikh Mansour plaything, although he's the legal owner. So then this is the being clever bit. Have Abu Dhabi been very clever in the way they've done this? It's a bit like Philip Green. His wife is the owner of his companies, and he's done nothing wrong there. But you think, I'm sure Tina Green doesn't sit there every day at a desk making executive strategic decisions about, the Philip Green empire. So it's that sort of question. So that's why I would answer your point that UEFA have got to find a way of. And I know I'm sounding being a bit not defensive. I'm being a bit smug here. UEFA have got to find a way of proving that the money did come from Sheikh Mansour, and they've got no jurisdiction over Etihad or Arba or any of the other companies involved. And I think that's where, to use the word clever, that's where City have been quite, you might want to say, devious, clever. Bent the rules to the maximum, and I think that's where. That kind of was behind my question.
Okay, can I come back with another question from Colin to you, Jonathan? Yeah. One of Colin's questions was, and I think some of it, it's been answered already. But there's two questions. I'll ask you two questions because they tie into what's been discussed. One of them are: do you believe there's an element of protectionism in FFP by the old G14 and the current fuss around the Der Spiegel articles that we've been talking about? And also the second one is, should authorities be more worried about a club being run responsibly or one being run irresponsibly?
Yeah, I mean, both really interesting subjects. I mean, first of all, in FFP, I've been uneasy all along about it because I think it started off, first of all, as a political gambit by Michel Platini to try and curry favour around Europe. And I think it took what is, you could say is quite a noble principle, which I think was initially to stop clubs getting into too much debt. And we're thinking of a time now when You had something like the Glazer takeover of Manchester United, which appeared to saddle with Manchester United with a huge debt, although somehow it's not been seen as such in accountancy terms. But I think initially you sort of thought to yourself, yeah, okay, we can go for that. This club's going out of business, etc., etc. But it very quickly became clear that Platini was doing it to try and get votes around Europe, and that I think Colin is right. And this is where I've got a lot of sympathy for City and City fans, which is that I think the old G14, the ruling elite, the clubs that want to have the Champions League become a closed shop. I think they very quickly saw the value from their selfish point of view of FFP, which was of course pulling up the trapdoor and stopping any clubs joining them. Now, I would strongly argue, and I'm sure you guys would as well, that FFP was never meant to stop new investment in football. FFP wasn't supposed to stop, responsible ownership where they're trying to grow a club, create something, and have it on a stable footing, which is where Manchester City are, surely. And I think over time it's morphed into something that it wasn't intended to be, and that's why I think actually that I think it is pretty unworkable. To go back to Colin's previous point, I understand where he's coming from now. That actually, every time there's a financial regulation, then people with money will then employ very clever people to get their way around it. That will always be the case, and maybe the future for football is actually to just have a simple salary cap and nothing else. Rather than FFP and all it entails. I don't know if it's ever possible to have a salary cap, but it seems to me that would be, if you wanted to genuinely have an even playing field, but allow new investment, a salary cap would probably be a reasonable way to do things.
Can I ask why all of a sudden, when salary caps are being discussed now as a way of, because Manchester City are this huge sort of juggernaut that people call us, and richest club in the world, and blah 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 blah. Why all of a sudden now should we be discussing that type of salary when it hasn't happened in the days of when Liverpool could pay the best players in the 80s, Everton, United in the 90s, can spend 30 odd million pounds on a Rio Ferdinand and give him 50 grand a week, which at the time was extortionate amount of money. And why all of a sudden now do we have to have this conversation about let's keep it now, let's do it now because it's our turn? And that's the thing, that's the way it seems, is that, because it's our turn now, other people don't like it. And it's like, well, why now do we have to have all these new laws and new caps and new everything else? And that's what really annoys City fans. It's like, well, it never happened in the 80s and it never happened in the 90s. And why all of a sudden does it happen now? Why does everyone want it now? Because another club has now come into this elite group, pushed everyone's noses out the way, and played the best football that we've seen in the Premier League. Why now do we have to have a salary cap? I'm not saying I disagree with it, but Colin, what are your thoughts?
Well, FFP has created. I'm absolutely on the same page as Jonathan here. Rather than having an adversarial shout at each other across the ether, I think we're absolutely on the same page. In fact, I'm probably even more radical because I accept the need for financial responsibility in football, because let's be honest, we've seen so many instances of irresponsibility. You can't, there's no moral argument against some sort of financial regulation. My argument, and I was an accountant in a previous life, is financial fair play is about the worst way you could do that. Because there's a very narrow focus on the profit and loss account. It doesn't look at cash flow, it doesn't look at assets. And my argument has always been that you could buy a club that made a profit of 50 million. You could then start to run it irresponsibly. So the next year it broke even. The year after that, it lost 50 million, and you could still pass financial fair play. In fact, I'll give you an example. Back in 2008, 2007, sorry, it was 2008, just before the takeover. Prior to Shinawatara's takeover of Manchester City, I've been involved in a supporters trust we were trying to, City were a quoted company, we were trying to get some sort of representation on the board. And that all sort of died a bit when Shinawatra came in, because he was then became 100% owner of the shares. So there's no point in doing that. But after, at the end of that season, when Sven was sacked, Mark Hughes was appointed, City were in serious danger of administration. I mean, they were on the verge of administration. I'm not sure how much you know of the story. They had to pay a £15 million instalment on the players they bought for Sven the previous summer, and they didn't have the money. And there was Gary Cook was just, I'd love to be go back in time and sit in Gary Cook's office around that time, early June, because it must have been absolute chaos. But they were talking to accountants about potentially going into administration. They didn't in the end. But if FFP had existed, City would have passed financial fair play. So as a regulation mechanism, it's completely useless.
Yeah.
And actually, just to finish off, the UEFA benchmarking report came out recently, and I did a piece on that for the City fanzine King of the Kippax. And we talked about debt. Absolute debt has not reduced over 10 years since FFP came in.
Which leads me to a question from Colin to you, Jonathan, and that is, as somebody who is not a fan of FFP, which we've spoken about this before, how is it supposed to encourage equity investment rather than debt, and yet restricts equity whilst putting no restrictions on debt?
Yeah, no, I mean, you've got me thinking about whether actually, I don't know. You tell me, Colin. Is a regulation aimed at debt even possible? Because I think that's what we agree that if there's something that needs to be eradicated,
can you put your camera down a bit?
Sorry.
That's it. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
If there's something that needs to be eradicated, it's irresponsible owners putting in clubs in danger. Because debt is the one thing that I think that we would want to tackle, not investment. I would totally agree.
It's debt and cash flow, excessive debt and cash flow, poor cash flow, which will kill. Because that was what was killing City in the mid 2000s. They were spending more than they earned in revenue, and John Wardle was having to prop them up, and he just said no in the end.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's there's at least two sorts of debt. Let's split it into. There's the Glazer leverage debt, which they would not have got away with in the NFL. Yeah, I'm a bit of a fan of particular American sports, NFL, baseball, and the NFL limits the amount of debt that can be secured on a club's assets, and I think it's mainly for infrastructure. So the Glazers would not have got away with doing at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers what they got away with doing at Manchester United. Then you look at Spurs, for example, and they're taking on over £600 million worth of debt. It will be probably by the time they move into the new stadium. And obviously the hope is this will generate increased revenue. Although I think they're taking a risk, because if they fall out the top four, they're losing a lot of that revenue they're hoping to generate. So, but UEFA should be, regulatory bodies should be looking at that and saying, you've got to be sure of this. This is going to be a prudent decision. Because if you're taking on 600, you probably end up £650 million worth of debt by the time they finish. If you're taking on this debt, you could kill the club if you get it wrong. And actually, Chelsea's another good example. Chelsea was the example of thinking of, because obviously, when FFP came in, Roman Abramovich wrote off all the debt in the Chelsea Football Club, and he converted it to equity. But he was clever, because clever, devious, whatever. He moved that debt to the holding company, Fordstam. So Fordstam has a 1.2 billion debt in its accounts, which is repayable within 18 months if he sells Chelsea.
So my question is that immoral, Jonathan, or is it unethical, or is it just being smart?
Well, it's probably just being smart in Roman Abramovich's case, but it's also a great danger to Chelsea, isn't it?
Yes,
because I agree with Colin's reading of it, that if he walks away tomorrow, that club is in a very serious corner.
Well, the buyer has to fund that. Has to pay him back. Now, if you've got to buy the club's assets, in fact, they don't even own the ground properly, do they? It's owned by a third party. which is not neither Roman Abramovich nor Chelsea Football Club. But a buyer's got to think that investment's got to be worthwhile on buying the club on top of the 1.2 billion pound debt. And I was looking at this actually the other day, and I'm trying to work out how it works. But that debt is increasing, so presumably the money is flowing to Chelsea from Fordstam. I'm not quite sure of this. So I'm not 100% sure on my ground here. To that disguised owner investment, so you're right. I mean, there has to be a way of, if not regulating debt, perhaps linking debt to net assets or something like that. There is a way of doing it, or ensuring, as the revised financial fair play rules did, you've got to prove to UEFA, if you want to inject equity into the club, that you've got a plan within 4 years to make that payoff, to be profitable and compliant within 4 years. So,
it's Jonathan. Any answer?
Yeah, well, no, go. I mean, I think if we're talking about ethics, I think one of the examples that makes me uneasy would be what's happened to Real Madrid over the years, where, let's say some very favourable deals involving Spanish local authorities, government, in terms of buying their training ground and so on, have propped them up. So, I don't see FFP in its current state as addressing any moral rights and wrongs. I think we can agree on that this is something that came in for one reason, as it ended up becoming the tool of the rich and powerful. I agree with that. I think just to make it clear where I was coming from, because I think this originated from basically me tweeting about this on Saturday night, which was really, my standpoint is less about the ethics of FFP and more about just the factor of breaking the rules. And I guess this is one of the questions that I wanted to ask Colin. So, I mean, feel free to ask Andy, but this is behind my point about these Football Leaks allegations now suggest that City's ownership have on at least 3 occasions with 3 different things, FFP being one of them, payments to players, agents being another one, and third-party ownership being another one. There appears to be 3 areas now where City's owners are willing to just ignore the rules and do their own thing. And my point, if these allegations are true, is that that's just a very dangerous thing for football, and I don't like it. Whatever I think about FFP, I don't like that behaviour.
Can I hold you there, Colin? Hold you there 1 minute. I need to just run to the toilet quick.
I think it's still recording, but yeah. It's I mean, it's a good point. I think I think one of the reasons City fans talk about smears is people are quick to jump on things that appear in the press, and I can't tell you this, but newspapers simplify things. Newspapers look for a headline. I mean, your colleague Martin Ziegler was a prime example when he had the press conference with Alexander. Is it Seferin? I'm not Yeah. And he talked about a concrete case. And Martin jumped on this to imply that UEFA had a clear case against Manchester City. When in fact, what I think what was clear in hindsight was that he meant this particular case. And it was interesting. So everyone that Martin produced his story, and within a few minutes, the Daily Mail had picked it up. And of course, as we know, as you know, everything, you get a good story, it's around the whole media world within 5 minutes. David Conn, I know David quite well. David Conn actually went to UEFA and queried this. And UEFA clarified, he meant the specific case. And no, there is no investigation. So we're not looking at any ban. I have to say, this whole thing is very complex. The third party, I believe we made it clear that Bruno Zuccolini, wasn't it, was with the player involved, that he was subject to third party ownership. Now, and he comes back to the Tevez, Eliakim Mangala was another one who was subject to third party ownership. Yeah, and I think as long as you this is the big thing in Portugal, of course. But so again, I think there are obviously rules on third-party ownership, but they only go up to a point. I'm not expert on the third-party ownership rule. Certainly, you can't if clubs are buying a player like we did with Mangala, we did with Tevez. We have to buy out that third-party ownership, which is why there was so much fuss about the fees for Tevez and Mangala, because they were part were reported as what we paid the clubs, particularly with Mangala, but the other part was what we had to pay the third party. So I agree. It does worry me if we're pushing too far against rules intended to protect the game, because I can't come on here and say FFP is not protecting clubs and then defend actions which are potentially harmful. Assuming that, I mean, there's been again a lot of assumptions. So the Sancho case is being looked at. It's been talked about as an illegal payment, but it's not illegal till someone says it's illegal. And of course, there's the FIFA case about young players. And again, it's the Chelsea ban. I'm not sure what's going to happen with City, but I think we're involved in that as well. So I'm not going to defend rule breaking. I'm not. I'm even going to. It makes me very nervous that we're even that we're pushing the boundaries, maybe slightly too far on the wrong side of, immoral, unethical.
Okay, so Colin, thank you for that. Jonathan, I don't know whether you want to come back on anything that Colin said. If you need to make a statement, I've got one more question from you to ask to Colin before we wrap up. But if you want to come back,
it's interesting. Just very briefly, and in the interest of fairness, Colin's, just picking up on that. I'd have to say I'm also not saying City are the only club that appear to be pushing the third-party ownership thing. There are certainly other ones, and also with apparent payments to young players, we've got the Andreas Christensen Chelsea case. So I think I really would like to stress this is in no way an attempt to sort of say City stand alone in their actions, all that sort of stuff. I'm just disquieted by the pattern of these three things coming together. But I'm certainly not saying that City are the only club doing any of these things.
Which is why I think City fans get nervous, talk about this smears, because at the same Football Writers Festival where you did the Blizzard event, I went to one with Mike Calvin, and he'd just done his book about youth football. A very powerful read, and he had Joey Barton and Paul Lake. And they were all in agreement that the system of young players is ridiculous. At every club, virtually every. Mike did the. Is it No Hunger in Paradise? Was the
that's right? Yeah,
he did the film. And obviously, some clubs, some coaches are trying to be very good about this, but there's a lot of sharks in the water. I think that's possibly why but it's always City's name that comes up, and I think that's possibly one of the reasons why City fans get a little bit defensive on this.
Which leads me to my final question. It's been an absolutely fascinating listen, certainly from my point of view, listening to Jonathan and Colin. And this was Jonathan's final question to you, Colin, and I guess to Man City fans in general, which sort of wraps us up with this brilliant video. Why do otherwise intelligent fans like Colin and you, Andy, thanks, Jonathan, feel they have to keep defending the actions of the ownership, whether in terms of human rights or this? And we're talking about what we've been discussing about today. Why can't you just support your club without supporting all the other stuff? Colin?
Well, that's what we want to do, really. But I mean, obviously, we are subject to accusations, and there was a particularly bad one, Barney Ronay, a particularly daft article, but kind of putting the blame onto City fans. All we want to do is go and support our club, and you could say that's wrong. That we should think about what's going on in the wider world, and you'd be surprised, Jonathan, how many City fans do. One of my friends boycotted the club during the Shinawatra ownership. He wouldn't go and watch a game. He's come back now. He's quite left wing. If it's okay with Russ, then it's okay. Then it's probably okay with everyone. I actually, I wrote an article for the fanzine, a long article for the fanzine. I was asked to do by the editor, and it was about the subject of human rights in Abu Dhabi, and of course around the Matthew Hedges thing, and all the stuff that Nick McGeehan. I know Nick, a good guy, but he's very focused on human rights in Abu Dhabi. And I did a long article on this, and I kind of split it into two. I'm not going to defend stuff that they do wrong. And my view has always been that if Abu Dhabi is using Manchester City to provide a window for the world to look at them, they've got no complaints about what that world sees when it looks through that window. They can have no complaints. They've got to take the rough with the smooth. It can't all be plain sailing. There's two elements to it beneath that. There is stuff which is clearly morally wrong. The treatment of migrant workers. There are deficiencies in the justice system. They're probably rather too sensitive to criticism, too sensitive to criticism than we would like them to be, and the treatment of dissidents. And they could do something about that tomorrow. Could and should, because those are the standards we accept in a civilized world. So I'm not in any way going to defend that. However, I think we're guilty of double standards to some degree, because the UAE has only been a state since 1971. It's set up all these institutions from scratch. It's less than 50 years old. My argument is, and I'm just having an email correspondence with the history professor at Manchester University, who's a big City fan, who's emailed me about something completely on a lower level completely than kind of human rights. But it took us 12, 15, we signed, King John signed Magna Carta. And it was 1921 before we got men and women over 21 able to vote freely. In between, I can't remember what it's called, a Bill of Human Rights or something in the late 17th century. So expecting the UAE to kind of develop from basically a tribal monarchy to a modern, sophisticated Western style democracy in less than 50 years is completely unrealistic. And it doesn't take into account the religious and cultural norms of that part of the world and the political pressures that regimes out there are under. You only have to look at Syria, at Iraq, at Libya. Well, Libya's not North Africa, Egypt as well, Israel, and the Palestinian territory. The political, it's a powder keg, political powder keg. And you look at Iraq and you think, were they actually better off under Saddam Hussein? Because he certainly wasn't. He was a tyrant. He was a dictator, but it wasn't the complete chaos it is today. And the same for Gaddafi. Now we're going off into all sorts of different areas here.
What I'm going to do is, obviously we're running out of time because Jonathan's got to go. So I'm going to turn around and say, I'm going to ask you both a question. And that is to say, my hypothetical question would be, if Jonathan, I'll come to Colin first. Colin, if you had a question to Jonathan that if we were to meet together next week and we did this again, is there something else after today's chat that you think I'd still like to ask him about this? And I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm just checking to see all the. No, I think. I think it's been a really interesting chat. Really enjoyed it. I think what we talk about, if we met next week, I think the substance of the chat would be less on City maybe and more on the wider issue. So, financial fair play. Is football a sport? Is it a business? Should it be regulated to be competitive? How do we deal with the globalization? How do we deal with the issues where the TV supporter, the TV armchair fan is more important than the guy who goes to games? So that would be my question, I guess.
Okay, so Jonathan, hold that question, because we may in the future, in the next episode, come back and do another brilliant. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you two, debate certain questions. But Jonathan, same question to you. If you could ask Colin one question, let's say we meet again in a week's time, what question would you ask of Colin?
Yeah, well, I find this fascinating, and Collins provides very intelligent answers, and I guess that sort of reassures me a little bit. I think we spoke about this last time, Andy, that when you try and have discussions on Twitter when you're a journalist and you're trying to talk to a fan base or whatever, it becomes quite hard to actually have a discussion because of the constrictions of that medium.
Yeah.
And I actually think I'd be similar to Colin. And I think maybe the bigger question is also about how do we actually get confidence back in our institutions, because it's quite clear that we both, from slightly different viewpoints, have limited faith, shall we say, in UEFA here and the way these rules are being applied. And I think maybe the slight elephant in the room on both sides here is that there's an UEFA are saying that they're going to investigate these leaked documents, but do we actually have confidence in what that process? As a journalist, I've tried to find out what it is. It's you almost get no answer from them. It's very, very opaque, and why should it take leaked documents, which may have been hacked, therefore stolen? Why does it take that to bring this to the fore? So I think there are lots of issues for football, and as I say, I think Colin's answered my biggest concern, I think, which is that I just want fans, to stay sceptical about their football clubs, all football clubs, and not always just try and defend anything just because they support the club. And that doesn't apply to City fans. That applies to fans of Chelsea fans and Abramovich and all sorts of stuff. So I think we'd have more to discuss than probably to fire questions at each other if we do this again.
Well, okay, so you've got 20 seconds left, and this is the biggest crux, because this is my problem, and this is why I'm doing this now for Man City Fan TV, is the fact of, I know what it's like. Jonathan, you know what it's like, because we've discussed this a lot. Colin, we've discussed this a lot, that when journalists engage with Twitter followers in particular, because Twitter seems to be like the most heated sort of like, medium, we get this effing this and effing that and blah, blah, blah. And I keep trying to sort of say, if you do that, then journalists are not going to engage. And what we want to do is engage with journalists. And it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. So if I said, well, you've got 20 seconds to appeal to the Twitterati out there and sort of say, look, journalists, sometimes we know there's a clickbait element to their posts. We understand that, just like there is from Man City Fan TV or Colin from Press Switch Blue or what. Can we try and establish some sort of, common ground whereby we can both engage with journalists rather than abusing each other? Simon Bachowski of Manchester Evening News, I've been in a load of light-hearted debate with him over the last few days, and he's called me all sorts of names and says I called him all sorts of names, and it doesn't work. It doesn't. We need to engage with each other because we are match-going fans. You're the journalist that writes about it, and if we don't engage with each other, then it's just we're going round in a vicious circle. So, Colin, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Why should we engage with football journalists?
Well, for the simple reason that I like to educate them. They're not experts on the sort of I know a lot about, as Jonathan has found today. So Gabriel Marcotta, your colleague at the Times, I think, is brilliant to engage with. I also like Duncan Castles because Duncan will engage with you, and of course Duncan is Duncan, but you can have a conversation with him. And for me, it's about education because a lot of journalism is about perhaps copy and paste, not to be too insulting, as we talked about earlier. Someone sees a story in the Mail all the time.
10 seconds.
And they pick it up without questioning it. So it's about education for me.
Brilliant. Jonathan, final word, 20 seconds. Why should fans, when they read your articles, not just you, but obviously, all the other journals, why should we engage with you and not they should not start effing and jeffing and whatever else?
Well, because there isn't an agenda against Manchester City, at least not from everybody. That every football club should be under scrutiny, and just because a club is scrutinised, it doesn't mean that the medium that's doing so is actually trying to get at the football club or get at the fan base. If you're being a good journalist, you have to ask independent questions about rights and wrongs and try and be consistent. And I would just say that if you can engage and maybe listen to a point of view that you might not want to hear about your club or your club's ownership, it might just take you out of that bubble of being the fan 100% and give you a different perspective. And I think it's dangerous when football fans are only football fans and aren't thinking as human beings. But as I found from this discussion, actually, we're not talking, the very intelligent points from both of you. I'm not applying that to everybody, but sometimes on Twitter, you get the sense that people are just being so blinkered that there's no reasoning with them. And actually, when you talk to them in person, that's not the case.
Which is exactly why we brought you on, both of you on to Man City Fan TV. I mean, it's been an absolutely, I've been enthralled listening to both of you. You both know far more than me on FFP, but also it's been interesting debating both questions back and forth. And, we've tried to do this. We'll do this with any journalist, but the one thing I want to say is Jonathan Northcroft has been absolutely brilliant with us at Man City Fan TV. He gave us the interview after the Bournemouth game in December. We spoke to him and engaged with him in the right way. And that's important, on Twitter last week. And he agreed to come on. And what we've got is an absolutely wonderful debate with Jonathan and Colin Savage. Press Which Blue, go and follow him. Knows all this stuff on Man City and FFP in particular. And I just want to say, both of you, thank you so much. It's really important to us because, getting two experts on is bit of credence for the channel, because we just like to hear sort of expert opinions. And I'd really like to say thank you to Jonathan Northcroft from the Sunday Times, and also Colin Savage, Press Which Blue. Guys, listen, have a great afternoon. I know, Jonathan, you're off to pick up your children, so I want to say a massive thank you for coming on. Colin, thanks again.
Yeah, well, thanks to Jonathan. As I said before, I've met Jonathan before. He was a lovely man, and it's been just reinforced my opinion. What a nice guy. Well, and him and so many of his colleagues are when you get to talk to them properly.
Oh, well, thanks. Really nice to talk to you again. Hope to see you again.
That's great. Listen, guys, it's Andy from Man City Fan TV. Don't forget, subscribe, click notification, and whatever you do, don't forget, comment below the video, because these two guys, we'll have to get them back on in a week or two's time, because they've been absolutely amazing. But anyway, we'll see you soon. Hey, listen, thank you so much.